it finally is. Comfortably numb. And believe me, I have been waiting eagerly for this just as you have been, because it is a beautiful piece of artistic expression. And, well, let's dig right in. So, what is it that makes this piece of music so transcendental? What is it really? Well, as usual, when we meet something of such beauty, it's nearly impossible to put our finger on it. Reminds me of what the verse says. I can't quite put my finger on it. For some, it might feel like sacrilege to even try. But I'm a musician, and my job is to study and dig into the details of the best so that we can learn and grow from it as much as possible. Let's do that. And as I sat listening to this piece over and over and over and over, trying to decide how to shape my approach to this in-depth discussion, because as many of you have said in your urging and eagerness to get here, you've been saying it's incredible. I can't wait till you get there. And it's true. There's so much to take in this piece of music. But certain elements began to isolate themselves and call out for attention. And I'm going to focus on those this time. The overall feel of the song, it's important. It has a special, I might even say, comforting kindness to it. To me, there's a softness or gentleness about it. It doesn't come out as bitter, angry, fighting, afraid. There's none of the clawing at the walls or railing against fate that we have been so immersed in for so much of this album. And in fact, as this piece of music progresses, it takes on an almost buoyant cheerfulness. There's a kind of pulsing, riding the waves. Maybe I would describe it as trauma-less or even atraumatic. And interestingly, it doesn't come across to me as sounding numb in the way I might have imagined if I were just reading the title. But it certainly sounds comfortable. Well, as I have thought about it, I've come to the conclusion that the numbness expressed in the music is not a kind of numbness that we might feel. Rather, it's expressing complete removal from the pain and drama and trauma of the world around us. So we don't feel numb, but nevertheless, we are numb to all that surrounds us. Now, digging into the nuts and bolts, the construction of the music, there are some very well-chosen design elements. We can pick some of them out with our ears, even if we know nothing about music theory and all the ins and outs of musical creation. First of all, there's something which is an important feature of this song, and that is the setting of two separate characters. So much of this album is monologue, but in this song, we get to hear two distinct characters within one song. And they are so beautifully set so that each one has its own specific range and style. The first one is, well, let's nickname it the Doctor. And when we get into the meaning of this song, you'll see why I am being careful to say it's a nickname and not the actual identity. I'll call the second voice Pink. Now, notice how each character occupies its own pitch range. The Doctor's voice, the first one that we hear, is centered around lower notes. Is there anybody in there? And when Pink's voice enters a bit later, it rides higher. There is no pain. It's pitched higher. That in itself is a great way to give each voice its own identity. But looking a little closer at these voices, the voices of these two characters, each one has its own style as well. The doctor's voice follows a sort of natural speaking line. Well, of course, the rise and fall of the voice is rather exaggerated, but it still feels more like speech than like a song. Just tell me where it hurts. We'll get you on your feet again. Relax. I'll need some information first. Pink's voice, on the other hand, is a bit more in the singing style. More legato with long, sustained lines of notes. And it's true, they don't really travel very far, but there is no pain. A distant ship on the horizon. It flows more lyrically, and combined with his higher pitched voice, it gives the impression that Pink is speaking towards a figure above himself. In other words, he's lying on his back, he's looking up, and his voice is directed upwards to whomever is standing over him, to this doctor figure. We feel that, we sense that simply by the way the voices are set and presented musically. And while we're looking at the voices, we can also take a moment to appreciate the musical poetry in this passage, where the music paints the text and we hear what we can only describe as melodic waves. When it says, "You are only coming through in waves." Let's find these actual pitches here. So we have a distant ship. Let's go up here. A distant ship. Let's find the right sharp. A distant ship, smoke on the horizon. And then, you are only coming through in waves. You are only coming through in waves. There's this wave to that phrase, which is absolutely beautifully set textual painting in the music. In fact, this whole passage is so well crafted in how it builds the imagery. We are taken from the statement, "You are receding," and the receding transitions us to the idea of a distant ship smoke on the horizon. Receding, distant ship smoke on the horizon. It's great in how detailed this image is painted in our minds. And then our attention shifts. It is shifted from this ship smoke vanishing from sight to these wonderfully watery waves. And after the poetry of the words has built us up to this point, we suddenly find the expression of the imagery no longer in the words alone, but also in the music as well, when we get to this moment of, "You are only coming through in waves." It's so smoothly done. It's a wonderful marriage of language and music. And it really blurs the lines between the two. We can't speak of the poetry as being only in the domain of words, of language, but music as well. And it's true that we often say that poetry makes use of the musical elements found within a language. But here in this moment, we find the music painting the words and the words painting the music, and they're somehow one and the same unit. I think this is a wonderful illustration of what is also happening instrumentally throughout the song. The blending and the sharing of the load, the subtle transitions between and insertions and interjections of instruments, one to the next to the next. We feel as if we are far from the front lines. But there are some other great structural choices in this song too, which we can discover if we start to look at the harmonic design. So let's dig into some technical stuff here, and I'll try to keep it understandable for everyone, even the non-musicians, so stick with me here. The first one I want to look at is what I'm going to call the doctor's chord sequence. Now this doctor's voice is this whole portion, the doctor's portion, is set in the key of B minor. And so our home pitch is B. B is 1. Now we have to think about scale numbers here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're in the key of B minor, so it's a minor scale. Now, musical numbered notes of the scale are kind of like, you can think of them kind of like a revolving door. Let's say you have a 3-section revolving door and you number each section 1, 2, 3. And if you go clockwise, you meet 1, 2, 3. But if you go counterclockwise, you meet 1, 3, even though you've only made one step. So here's what happens. I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if I go the other direction, 1, 7, 6, 5, 4. I've traveled the same number of notes, but I've arrived on 4 rather than 5. That's important because we are traveling downwards here. So here's how it starts. Hello, is there anybody in there? We walk down to A. Just nod if you can hear me. And then we walk down past the 5 to the 4. What has happened? We began on B minor. Then we move to A. That's a 7. Then we move down to G. That's 6. We kind of skip through 5. And we land on E minor. This is a fairly common sequencing of a descending bass line, walking down 1, 7, 6, 5. It's fairly standard harmonic technique. But this one skips right through the 5 to make us land on 4 instead. It's a nice variant of the technique, and one that is highly effective in this song. Since, well, if you remember from what I've talked about in some of my other videos, the 4 gives us more of a feeling of lift as opposed to the solidity of the 5. Now, I want to talk about the function of the 5 a bit more here so that we can really appreciate what is happening in the music. You've heard me talk about the 7th degree of the scale fairly often and how it begs us to just take one more little step up to the tonic. Let's go to a major scale. It's easier to demonstrate. One more little step. Now, that's why we call it the leading note, because it leads us back home. Well, check this out. The leading note of any scale is always part of the major 5 chord. I'm going to go to D major again because I don't want to complicate it with too many variables. So D major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is our leading note. Our 5 chord uses this note. And so that leading note is right in the center of the 5 chord. That means that the 5 has a natural pull towards home built into it. So not only does it counterbalance the 1 with its power and weight, as I've talked about before, but it also wants us to take us back to the 1. it's a natural progression towards resolution, which is one of the reasons why a 5-1 cadence sounds so compelling and final. Let's even turn it into a 5-7. If I go like this, it sounds like the end. This here pulls us, it drives us, it sends us to here. Or I could go the other direction. I could go I even tell my students that that's the end chord. It sings the end. Now, think about the fact that Comfortably Numb doesn't really want to take us anywhere or resolve anything. After all, there's no conflict, there's no drama, there's obviously no need to resolve it, right? Avoiding the 5 keeps the tug-of-war, the conflict, out of the music, as well as keeping us in a kind of comfortable limbo. And so arriving on 4 while skipping through 5 is perfectly suited to the feel of this piece. Now let's take a look at what happens when Pink's voice enters. Here's a little figure that we find featured here. Well, this figure, we find it on different chords, but the figure itself features pretty much throughout this whole section, and so I'm going to use it as my way of locating ourselves here. And it takes us through a whole new chord sequence. Now remember, the verse is set in B minor, but this chorus starts in D major. And these two scales are what we call relatives because they share the same 2 sharps, kind of like family members with the same last name, but entirely different personalities. Here is B minor. I'll just do the natural minor. Okay, it has its own mood, personality, quality. Now listen to the D major. That's a different person, or at least a different personality, right? And these 2 keys are being used to represent the 2 different personalities, the 2 different voices in this song. So we've been in B minor. And now the 2 chords at the beginning of the chorus, which are D and A, really establish us in this new key because they are the tonic. So here's D and here's A. That is the 1 and the 5, the tonic and the dominant of this new key. I was just talking about how the doctors section didn't have this balance of power between 1 and 5. In that section, it avoided the 5. We went to 4 instead to give this more subtle, smooth quality. Now here, suddenly, we are met with this contrasting pull between the 2. This makes a great contrast with the doctor's verse. It's not only the singer's voices and the pitch range difference that conveys the 2 different characters speaking, but the harmonic structure of the music as well. Notice that the first character, the doctor, is the one speaking from the outside, and that is the voice which is set in a harmonically indistinct, undirected minor key. We could say it's representing the fact that he is hazy, far away, and only coming through in waves. Whereas this second character, Pink, is closer, present, clear. He might not be feeling too well, but this is the first person of the song. And that's represented by the major key and these clear, strong harmonic progressions. But we wouldn't want it to sound too robust, too vibrant and healthy, since Pink is, after all, not well at the moment. So rather than keep driving us straight through in this 1-5 D major power sequence, instead, just as soon as this D major key is established, it changes, shifting downward by a whole step to C major. And the same relationship is repeated again, 5-1-5-1. We could even take the liberty of reading into this lowering of key the idea that this character, the inner Pink, is sinking, losing potency. We could even say he's being suppressed. So here's what we end up with. D, A, now we move to C, G, and then we move back to D, and the whole sequence starts again. And that's what we have throughout Pink's section. Now this idea of Pink being suppressed, I'll come back to that in a little bit. But what about the refrain? There's a different chord sequence here. We have A, let's make sure I get A, and then it goes to a C, then a G, and then to a D. Now, these 4 chords are basically the same 4 chords which we met when Pink began speaking. They're just rearranged a bit, kind of mixed together so that there isn't a clear, solid key difference as we felt at first in the first portion of Pink's speech. And as we progress through this refrain sequence, I have become comfortably numb, it gradually brings us back around to D as the center. Kind of reminds me of a little children's book from my childhood days, which was a simple little child's book about going for a walk around the farm. And the last page ended with, "Where do you think we'll be?" Turn the page. "Why? We're right back where we started." And that's just how it is here. We find ourselves right back where we started when Pink entered with the D major. Now, we have to talk about the guitar solos, and there are 2 of them in this song. They're both stunning. The first one is not very long at all. In fact, in some ways, we could say it functions primarily as connecting material. But it's so beautiful in its own right that we still have to pause and notice it. And as I was doing my preliminary research about this music, preparing for this, I learned that people commonly refer to the first guitar solo as the light guitar solo and the second one as the dark guitar solo. So I'm going to use that terminology here. So with the light guitar solo, well, I listened to an interview with David Gilmour in which he told how he composed the song after having built what he thought was a high-strung guitar. Well, actually, this is a good moment for me to mention the fact that this song, Comfortably Numb, the music of it, was David Gilmour's composition, not Roger Waters. Much of this album I've been referring to Roger Waters. But here I think it's important to kind of balance that out and acknowledge Gilmour's contribution, especially in this song, which was his original creation. And when discussing his creation of the main guitar figure, he said, "I wrote the music that became that when I was doing my first solo album. I was just reaching the end of recording my album, and I couldn't be bothered to work on this one song. So it was basically a leftover musical idea from an earlier project, and fortunately, it eventually was developed and included here in the wall. We'd have no idea what we were missing if it had never happened, but we can be happy that that's how it worked out. Anyway, while working on his solo project, Gilmour said, one of the producers working with me said that he wanted to use a high-strung guitar. I had no idea what it meant. So I got an Ovation acoustic guitar and strung it with all unwound strings. I found that the higher the strings were, the better the song started sounding. I later found out that the traditional high-strung guitar is nothing like what I did, so it was my own creation for that song. Well, I'm still not entirely clear on whether he performed the entire Comfortably Numb on that high-strung guitar, his version of the high-strung guitar, or whether he just performed parts of it. But I'm pretty certain that this first solo, this light solo, is included in what he's talking about because it really does stay quite high in pitch and there's a really special, smooth quality about it. It easily fits into the song in its place though because it uses the same chord sequence as Pink's voice, which has just finished speaking. And he's shifted from D to C major every 4 bars. And now when this light guitar solo enters, it follows the same pattern. D major, 4 bars, C major, 4 bars, and so on. But now we have to talk about the big one. And I think, well, I call it that because I think that most of you, when you have been telling me, please hurry up and get to Comfortably Numb. Please, I can't wait to see what you have to say about it. And so many of you have said that guitar solo is just unspeakably incredible. I think you're talking about this dark solo, the big one. Now, I'm not a guitarist, so I'm not going to look at this from a guitar technique perspective. Instead, there are 2 specific things which stand out to me in this solo. First of all, the biggest, most powerful element is that this solo is incredibly, beautifully, emotionally rich. We could say it digs deep. And I know I'm stating the obvious, but stop and consider for a moment. This entire song has been about detachment, numbness, removal from discomfort. It's been light, spacey even, and then, after all of that, we are hit with this utterly gorgeous, powerfully emotional solo. And it goes on and on, taking us into all the places in our hearts that we might have wished to avoid. Perhaps they're too sensitive or too fragile or too dark. But David Gilmour takes us there. There is absolutely nothing comfortably numb about it. How does he do it? Well, as I've said about some pieces of music before, the eloquence and power lies primarily in the execution, the delivery, or the way we say it in the classical world, the interpretation. It's a complex mix of pacing, tonal qualities, dynamics, in this case, pitch flexibility, subtle ebbing and flowing, leaning on a certain note, letting a certain note fade, be barely spoken, and of course, all done by somebody who knows how to make his instrument speak, sing, cry. Most of the actual notes he plays are drawn from the B minor blues scale, which is B, D, E, F sharp, A, and then back to B, of course. Now remember, we started this whole song with the doctor's voice in B minor, so it makes perfect sense to return to that key as we finish up the piece of music. But Gilmour doesn't just return to B minor. He goes for B minor blues. In other words, the most expressive, soulful form of B minor that he can get. Now, of course, the blues scale is no stranger to rock music or guitar solos. I'm not suggesting any kind of novelty here. What I am saying is that all the way down to its very building blocks, this solo is primed for emotional content. He has a standard approach to building each phrase, and then methodically, systematically, he builds a progression. Phrase after phrase. You can't make a solo this length haphazardly, or it will end up, we could say, a bit like a highway system without engineers. It wouldn't take us anywhere. But his approach is excellent. And when we break it apart, we can find basically three main sections. We could say that section 1 is low and slow. There are an abundance of long-held notes and expressive bends. Section 2 still stays low, but some of these long notes some of these spaces are filled with busier passages and more notes, a little more decorative and elaborate. And then section 3 comes, and finally he starts adding in the higher notes. In this way, there's a consistent build-up, a journey from start to finish. Each new element, each layer brought in, develops the musical content a bit more. It takes us a bit further. And since there's such a clear, well laid out design, then Gilmour has a real structure within which he's free to work his magic. Music is like that. And great artists know that structure, design, and clear limits are the key to artistic freedom. Here, the scale, the consistent phrase structure, the three-part shape of the piece, they all give Gilmour the ability to focus its direction, to lead us along this emotional pilgrimage, we could say, even digging deep into the dark, strong emotional qualities. Now, I've spent a good deal of time digging into the musical content, but what about how this song fits into the narrative of the album as a whole? I'm going to take it without the movie first, because the movie really pushes us towards one specific interpretation, which, although it can be found in the music doesn't require that storyline. And in fact, I would say the music allows, even encourages, some other perspectives as well. So, leaving the movie out of it for a moment. Quick review. At this point in the album, Pink's wall is complete. He's made it through his psychological crisis breakdown and come up with a plan for functional stability, or so he thinks. He's decided to pull himself together and get on with life in a semblance of self-control. He's connected all the dots and figured out who and what is endangering his world, which is basically everybody and everything, and he has concocted a plan and approach to bring order and sense back into his universe. So then, we come to this song. What is it telling us? Well, of course, as with a lot of the songs in this work, there isn't only one right way to understand it. And in fact, there are things about it lyrically which are, I think, intentionally left ambiguous, so that we don't lock ourselves down too firmly. But that is helpful because it also causes us to focus more on the message than on some storyline or other. And when we focus on the message, we find some specific points being made, being emphasized here. As we've seen in the last couple of songs, in spite of Pink's desire to become, to be a certain kind of person, his past still haunts him. In fact, it's not his past, it's himself that gives him trouble. And now, as much as he'd like to move on, to work out his final solution, there's a perpetual conflict between his chosen mask and his inner self. And this song is telling us about his battle to suppress and control that inner person. Remember, I gave the first character in this song a nickname, the Doctor. Now let's step away from the idea of this being a doctor, from the idea that this doctor is actually another person, as we find in the movie. Because there's nothing in the music itself or in the lyrics that says it has to be that way. This voice, this character, can just as easily, and perhaps even better, represent the mask that Pink has chosen to wear. The cold, methodical persona that he's adopted for himself. The stoic mastermind who's removed all outer signs of feeling and arranged his world in a manner that makes sense. He's capable now of fixing any problem he runs into for anyone. It's simple. Just show me where it hurts, show me where the problem is, and I can administer a solution. The only real problem, as I've said before, this is not who Pink really is. And as much as he'd like to believe it, there's still his real self buried deep inside, the second voice. Now, that is a problem for him. Because for him to do what he believes, he has to not have feelings rise up and interfere with his decision-making process. That is weakness. He cannot be weak. He has systematically organized his room, meaning his personal life, and now he needs to be able to just as systematically organize the world around him. So he must get this part of him to toe the line as well. Anything less is illness. No problem. Administer whatever it takes to quiet the voice, to bring it into agreement. Suppress the feelings, get up and get on his feet, silence the objections, go out and get on with the show. And so, this is not how I am. I have become comfortably numb. Nevertheless, even though he's buried deep, his real, true inner self still exists, although feebly, and it's struggling to stay alive. He's confused, disoriented, lost in the past, reverting to childhood memories of illnesses. When I was a child, I had a fever. Is it really about some physical illness? Not so fast. Because the next verse says something else about this childhood memory. When I was a child, I caught a fleeting glimpse. Here is where the illustration in the movie is beautifully fitting. The rat. Young Pink did, at one time, feel compassion for others than himself, and in fact tried to help them. He caught a fleeting glimpse of the beauty and warmth of compassion, sympathy, empathy. But the child is grown, the dream is gone. With his current view, to aid the weak ones is akin to trying to help a rat. They are all filthy vermin and should die. In fact, will die regardless of any kindness shown, so they are not worth a second glance. They are the deplorables, the vermin, and all the other nearly unspeakable identities, names which Pink targets in the next song. Or we could appropriate from Victor Hugo and say that all les miserables are not worthy of life. Weakness and vulnerability are crimes. To wrap one's own sweater around a helpless creature and tend to it as best one knows how only contaminates the Good Samaritan, and anyway, it doesn't do any good. Now, here's an important element of the song. Remember how it starts with the self-examining question, "Hello, is there anybody in there? Just nod if you can hear me. Is there anyone home?" The idea is that the new Pink is checking to see if there's any of his old self inside that will cause him trouble. And the old one was the one which caught that fleeting glimpse, which is love. Even love for the most despised, in the movie portrayed as a rat. But the problem now, in the present tense, now at hand, is that now I've got that feeling once again. I can't explain, you would not understand. But these kinds of feelings are not allowed, and so he hastens to add, "This is not how I am. I have become comfortably numb." Can you see the inner turmoil, the inner struggle between the Pink who got that feeling once again, so unfamiliar he can't even identify what it is, and the need to obey the doctor, to be divorced from his feelings? And yet, those childhood experiences offering compassion have left their mark. And even now, as he's being brought into conformity by the doctor, he still recalls, "When I was a child, I caught a fleeting glimpse out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look, but it was gone. I cannot put my finger on it now. The child is grown. The dream is gone." And then the last line feels like both a triumph and a lament. And indeed it is. The real Pink laments the loss of something he can't even remember. "I have become comfortably numb." While the outer Pink celebrates his victory, his triumph over himself. "I have become comfortably numb." And we onlookers, we just want to weep at the utter tragedy, the incredible loss of it all. But instead of letting us sit there, David Gilmour steps in. And so a song about being numb, being detached, finishes by grounding us so deeply in who we are, connecting us and taking us into the very places the song talks about avoiding. The very feelings that Pink is intentionally suppressing. It's a fabulously powerful lesson packaged in musical form. Just think about what this song would be without this final guitar solo. Okay, it would be still good in many ways, but I don't think it would have near the thousands, maybe even millions of admirers that it boasts. Why? Because as much as we might like to think that lack of pain and discord would be desirable, it turns out that when we embrace those parts of ourselves rather than run from them or try to keep them out of our way, then our experience becomes vastly richer, more rewarding, incredibly satisfying. And that is why this song feels so transcendental. That is why it is such a wonderful highlight in this album. And we will see that when Pink finally learns this lesson, well, his whole life changes in the best way. I'll see you next time.